The Eastern Front. A canvas painted in shades of gray, brown, and crimson. A relentless landscape of mud, snow, and the ever-present specter of death. This was 1943. The German war machine, once seemingly unstoppable, was now bogged down, grinding against the implacable might of the Soviet Union. Hope, once a burning flame, had dwindled to a flickering ember, barely enough to illuminate the grim reality that surrounded them. The endless expanse of the Russian steppe offered little respite. Each sunrise brought renewed fighting, each sunset a deepening sense of despair. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, marked only by the constant barrage of artillery fire, the staccato bursts of machine guns, and the anguished cries of the wounded. Food was scarce, ammunition even scarcer. The once proud Wehrmacht was slowly being bled dry. Amidst this brutal landscape, a small group of women served. They were not on the front lines, not directly engaging in combat. Instead, they filled auxiliary roles: nurses, radio operators, clerks, and cooks. They were young, most barely out of their teens, their faces still carrying traces of innocence. They had joined the war effort with a mix of youthful idealism and a belief in the promises of the fatherland. They envisioned glory and a swift victory. The reality they found was a far cry from the propaganda they had been fed. These women witnessed firsthand the horrors of war, the senseless violence, the utter waste of human life. They tended to the wounded, offering what comfort they could amidst the chaos and suffering. They saw the fear in the eyes of the young soldiers, the desperation in their pleas for help. The weight of their experiences began to chip away at their youthful naivete, replacing it with a hard-earned cynicism. They spoke of home, of families they missed, of dreams they feared would never be realized. They shared stories of laughter and love, memories that seemed increasingly distant and unreal in the face of the present horrors. They clung to these memories, these fragments of a life before the war, as a lifeline in the face of overwhelming despair. Among them was Elizabeth, a young nurse who had volunteered with unwavering enthusiasm. She carried with her a photograph of her younger brother, a mischievous grin plastered across his face. She envisioned his future, a future she was fighting to protect. But the constant exposure to suffering began to erode her resolve. Doubts crept in, whispers in the back of her mind, questioning the purpose of it all. Then came the event that would change everything. A massive Soviet offensive shattered the German lines. Chaos erupted. The small group of women found themselves caught in the crossfire, their supply lines severed, their position untenable. Panic set in. The world around them dissolved into a maelstrom of fire and steel. They were surrounded, cut off, and facing the prospect of capture. The once distant horrors of war were now bearing down on them with full force. Capture felt like a certainty, a dark cloud looming on the horizon, pregnant with fear and uncertainty. The catastrophic loss was imminent, their fate hanging precariously in the balance. If you enjoy untold stories from history, be sure to subscribe for more. The failed offensive left a landscape of twisted metal and broken dreams. Smoke choked the air, acrid and thick with the scent of burning fuel and something else. Something undeniably human. The ground, once firm beneath their boots, was now a treacherous mire of mud and debris. The female soldiers, mere auxiliaries in the grand scheme of the Eastern Front, were scattered, lost, and utterly terrified. Their retreat had become a rout, a desperate scramble for survival against the relentless advance of the Soviet forces. Among them was Erica, barely 18, who had joined the war effort fueled by patriotic fervor and the promise of adventure. Now, her youthful idealism was being brutally extinguished by the cold reality of combat. The deafening roar of artillery had been replaced by an unnerving silence, broken only by the whimpers of the wounded and the distant rumble of approaching tanks. Erica clutched a tattered photograph of her family, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the horror that surrounded her. As the Soviet soldiers swarmed over the battlefield, the female soldiers were rounded up, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. The fear in their eyes was palpable. They were herded together, their movements clumsy and uncoordinated, their uniforms offering little protection against the biting wind and the hostile gazes of their captors. The initial confusion gave way to a chilling realization: they were prisoners of war. The treatment they received was harsh, devoid of any semblance of compassion. Stripped of their dignity and their belongings, they were crammed into overcrowded trucks, jostled and bruised as they were transported to makeshift holding camps. The journey was a blur of discomfort and fear, punctuated by the jeers and insults of their guards. Sleep was a luxury they could scarcely afford, their bodies aching, their minds racing with anxiety about what the future held. Erica watched as the veneer of Nazi ideology that had once held her beliefs began to crack. The promises of glory and conquest now seemed like empty words, hollow pronouncements that masked the brutal reality of war. Doubts gnawed at her, questioning everything she had been taught, everything she had believed. Was this what she had signed up for? Was this the glorious future they had been promised? She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her, stories of kindness and compassion, of the importance of empathy and understanding. Those stories now seemed like a distant dream, a stark contrast to the dehumanizing experience she was enduring. Erica had always been a good student, a dutiful daughter, eager to serve her country. Now, she wondered if she had been foolish, blindly following a path that had led her to this desolate place. She remembered her home, the scent of baking bread, the warmth of the fireplace, the laughter of her siblings. Those memories were now a source of both comfort and pain, a reminder of all that she had lost. The faces of her comrades reflected her own despair, a shared sense of disillusionment and uncertainty. Their futures were now inextricably linked, bound together by the shared trauma of war and the unknown fate that awaited them. They clung to each other for support, finding solace in their shared predicament, a small flicker of humanity in the face of overwhelming adversity. They knew that their lives had been forever changed, that the war had robbed them of their innocence and their dreams. All that remained was uncertainty and the daunting task of trying to make sense of it all. The news came unexpectedly, disrupting the monotonous routine that had settled over the group since their capture. A transfer. They were to be moved to another prisoner of war camp. The announcement rippled through the ranks, a mixture of apprehension and cautious hope washing over the women. Where would they be sent? What awaited them? The questions hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet universally felt. The Soviet guards offered no explanation, only curt orders to prepare for transport. The journey was arduous. Crammed into the back of a dilapidated truck, the women endured bone-jarring rides over rough terrain. The sun beat down mercilessly during the day, and the nights brought a chilling dampness that seeped into their weary bones. Food was scarce and of poor quality, barely enough to sustain them. Water was even more precious, rationed carefully to stave off dehydration. They huddled together for warmth and comfort, sharing stories and whispered anxieties to pass the time. Rumors spread like wildfire amongst the prisoners. Some said they were being sent further east, deeper into the heart of Russia, to a labor camp where conditions were even harsher. Others claimed they were being traded to another country, perhaps one of the Allied nations. The wildest speculation involved being released altogether, a prospect that seemed too good to be true. The women clung to these rumors, desperate for any glimmer of hope amidst their grim reality. Within the group, distinct personalities began to emerge. There was Erica, the stoic leader, who had served as a nurse on the Eastern Front. Her calm demeanor and practical skills provided a sense of stability and reassurance to the others. Then there was Inga, the young idealist, whose youthful optimism had been shattered by the horrors of war. She struggled to reconcile her former beliefs with the reality she now faced. And there was Greta, the quiet observer, who possessed a keen intelligence and a sharp wit. She listened intently to the stories and rumors, offering insightful commentary and a much-needed dose of skepticism. Each woman carried her own burdens, her own fears, and her own hopes for the future. Despite their dire circumstances, a sense of camaraderie began to develop amongst the women. They shared their meager rations, helped each other with their injuries, and offered words of encouragement during moments of despair. They were united by their shared experience, their shared fear, and their shared desire to survive. This bond, forged in the crucible of war, provided them with a strength they never knew they possessed. As they traveled further west, the landscape began to change. The endless steppes of Russia gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. The air grew warmer and more humid. They caught glimpses of bustling towns and fertile farmland, a stark contrast to the war-torn regions they had left behind. The changing scenery hinted at a vastly different environment, a world far removed from the brutal realities of the Eastern Front. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at a port city. The truck rumbled to a halt near a bustling harbor, filled with ships of all shapes and sizes. The women were herded onto a large transport ship, its hull painted a drab gray. As the ship pulled away from the dock, a collective gasp rose from the prisoners. They were leaving Europe behind, heading towards an unknown destination across the vast ocean. Where were they going? What awaited them on the other side? The uncertainty was terrifying, but also exhilarating. A new chapter was beginning, and for the first time in a long time, they dared to hope. The vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean stretched before them, an endless, shimmering horizon that both captivated and intimidated. Days blurred into weeks as the transport ship plowed its way westward. The women, crammed into the vessel's hold, struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy amidst the monotony and discomfort. The air was thick with the mingled scents of salt, sweat, and disinfectant. Space was at a premium, each woman carved out a tiny territory for herself, a fragile bubble of personal space in the crowded confines. Sleep offered little respite. Dreams, vivid and often nightmarish, replayed scenes from the front, the faces of fallen comrades, the chilling sounds of artillery fire. Waking brought only the dull ache of cramped muscles and the gnawing anxiety about what awaited them on the other side of the ocean. Their conversations, initially filled with bravado and unwavering belief in the cause, gradually shifted. Doubts began to surface, whispered at first, then spoken with increasing boldness. They questioned the leadership, the justifications for the war, the promises that had led them to this point. Flashbacks became a common topic, each woman sharing snippets of her life before the war, carefree days spent laughing with friends, stolen moments with loved ones, aspirations for a future that now seemed impossibly distant. These memories served as a bittersweet reminder of what they had lost and what they hoped to regain. The relationships between the women deepened, forged in the crucible of shared adversity. Bonds of friendship formed, offering support and comfort in moments of despair. But the close quarters also bred tension and conflict. Petty disagreements flared into heated arguments, fueled by exhaustion, fear, and the constant pressure of confinement. Some women retreated into themselves, becoming withdrawn and unresponsive, while others sought solace in prayer or quiet contemplation. One particularly fierce storm tested their resilience to its limits. The ship pitched and rolled violently, tossed about like a toy in the raging sea. Waves crashed over the deck, sending torrents of water cascading into the hold. Fear gripped the women as they clung to anything they could find, bracing themselves against the relentless onslaught. The storm mirrored the turmoil within them, the churning emotions of regret, uncertainty, and the desperate hope for a safe passage to an unknown future. When the storm finally subsided, leaving behind a trail of wreckage and exhaustion, the women emerged with a newfound respect for the power of nature and a deeper appreciation for the fragility of life. The shared experience had strengthened their bonds, forging an unbreakable connection that transcended their individual differences. They had weathered the storm together, and in doing so, had found a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. Then, one morning, a shout echoed through the ship. "Land! Land ahoy!" A collective gasp swept through the hold as the women scrambled to their feet, eager to catch a glimpse of the American coastline. A thin strip of land appeared on the horizon, gradually growing larger and more distinct as the ship approached. It was a beacon of hope, a symbol of a new beginning, a promise of a life beyond the horrors of war. As they drew closer, they could make out the details of the landscape, rolling hills, verdant fields, and the bustling activity of a port city. America. A land of dreams, a land of opportunity, a land that held the key to their future. The truck rattled along a dusty road, the Texas sun beating down with an intensity unfamiliar to the women. They squinted, trying to make sense of the landscape blurring past. Gone were the shattered buildings and scarred earth of the Eastern Front. Here, the world seemed impossibly vast and untouched. Flat plains stretched to the horizon, dotted with scrubby vegetation and the occasional lonely tree. The air hung heavy and humid, a stark contrast to the crisp, biting cold they remembered. It was a landscape of browns and greens, bathed in a light so bright it almost hurt the eyes. The women, huddled together in the back of the truck, exchanged nervous glances. What awaited them in this strange, new world? Rumors had swirled during the long journey, whispers of good treatment, of work, of eventual repatriation. But after years of war and captivity, trust was a scarce commodity. Each woman clung to her own hopes and fears, a tangled mess of anticipation and dread. As they approached the camp, a collection of low buildings surrounded by barbed wire fences came into view. It wasn't the imposing fortress they'd imagined. In fact, it looked rather ordinary. American flags flapped lazily in the breeze, and the air hummed with the distant sounds of machinery and human activity. The truck lurched to a halt, and the women were ordered to disembark. The process of registration was surprisingly orderly. They were led into a large, open building where they were asked their names, ranks, and dates of birth. Each woman was given a number, a new identity in this alien place. Medical examinations followed. Doctors, both men and women, checked for injuries and illnesses. The examinations were thorough but respectful, a far cry from the rough handling they had endured at the hands of their previous captors. Then came the most unexpected part, the interactions with the American guards. They were greeted with a surprising lack of hostility. The guards, young men mostly, seemed more curious than angry. They spoke in English, a language few of the women understood, but their tone was neutral, almost friendly. Interpreters were on hand to translate instructions and answer questions. It was a disorienting experience. After years of being treated as enemies, they were now being treated like people. The living quarters were simple but clean. Long, low barracks lined with rows of beds. Each woman was assigned a bunk and given a small locker for her belongings. It wasn't luxurious, but it was far better than anything they had experienced in recent memory. There was even a communal area with tables and chairs, a place to gather and talk. That first night in the Texas POW camp, the women lay in their bunks, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the American countryside. Crickets chirped, and the wind rustled through the trees. The air was warm and smelled of dust and something else, something vaguely sweet they couldn't quite identify. They felt a sense of relative safety and security they hadn't known in years. The war, for the moment, seemed far away. But the memories, the fears, and the doubts lingered, a heavy weight in their hearts. This new world was different, but the past was not so easily forgotten. The distribution of warm blankets felt almost surreal. After enduring the brutal cold of the Eastern Front, the damp chill of captivity, and the endless swaying of the ocean voyage, this simple act of providing warmth felt like a monumental shift. Each woman received a thick, woolen blanket, a far cry from the thin, threadbare coverings they had been accustomed to. The texture against their skin was unfamiliar, a luxurious softness they had almost forgotten existed. Then came the hot chocolate. Served in steaming mugs, the sweet, rich aroma filled the air, a scent that evoked memories of childhood, of a time before the war had consumed their lives. It was an unexpected offering, a gesture of kindness that seemed utterly incongruous with their status as prisoners of war. As they tentatively took their first sips, a wave of emotion washed over them. The warmth spread through their bodies, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in their bones. Disbelief was the common reaction. They had been taught to view the Americans as the enemy, as ruthless adversaries who sought their destruction. Propaganda had painted a picture of a cruel and heartless foe, yet here they were, receiving blankets and hot chocolate. It was a stark contradiction to everything they had been led to believe. Suspicion lingered in their eyes. What was the catch? What did these Americans want in return for their generosity? Was this some kind of trick, a psychological ploy to weaken their resolve? Their past experiences had taught them to distrust. Years of indoctrination, of being told what to think and how to feel, had created a deep-seated skepticism. They had witnessed firsthand the horrors of war, the brutality of both sides, and the ease with which human beings could inflict pain upon one another. Trust had become a rare and precious commodity, something to be guarded carefully. The concept of unconditional kindness was foreign to them, almost incomprehensible. Individual reactions varied. Some accepted the offering with quiet gratitude, their eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and relief. Others remained guarded, their expressions betraying their inner turmoil. A few refused to partake, convinced that there was a hidden agenda. They watched their fellow prisoners with suspicion, wondering if they were being naive, if they were falling for some elaborate scheme. One young woman, barely more than a girl, stood apart from the others. She clutched the warm blanket to her chest, her eyes fixed on the steaming mug of hot chocolate. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, followed by another, and then another. Soon, she was sobbing uncontrollably, her body racked with emotion. The unexpected compassion had shattered her defenses, releasing a torrent of pent-up grief, fear, and exhaustion. The weight of her experiences, the horror she had witnessed, the loss of her innocence, all came crashing down upon her. She hadn't allowed herself to truly feel anything for so long, and this small act of kindness had broken the dam. As the days passed, the warmth of the blankets and the sweetness of the hot chocolate lingered, not just in their bodies, but also in their hearts. A seed of hope began to sprout, slowly but surely, in the barren landscape of their souls. The hardened shells that had protected them for so long began to crack, revealing a glimmer of vulnerability, a flicker of humanity. The kindness they had experienced, though initially met with suspicion, was slowly beginning to thaw their frozen emotions. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still goodness to be found in the world, even in the midst of war. Life within the confines of the Texas POW camp settled into a predictable rhythm. Each day began with a reveille, a jarring sound that nonetheless became a familiar part of their existence. Following a meager breakfast, the women were assigned to various work details. Some labored in the camp's laundry, meticulously washing and ironing uniforms. Others toiled in the kitchen, preparing meals for both the prisoners and their American guards. There was also work to be done in the camp's gardens, tending to vegetables and flowers under the scorching Texas sun. The work was often monotonous and physically demanding, but it provided a structure to their days and a distraction from the anxieties that constantly gnawed at them. Beyond the work assignments, there were limited opportunities for recreation. Some of the women formed small groups to play card games or chess, using makeshift boards and pieces. Others found solace in writing letters to their families, although the uncertainty of whether those letters would ever reach their intended recipients hung heavy in the air. The American guards, perhaps sensing the women's need for mental stimulation, occasionally organized movie screenings in the camp's mess hall. These films, often American propaganda pieces, offered a glimpse into a world vastly different from the one they knew, a world of idealized domesticity and unwavering patriotism. As time wore on, interactions between the female prisoners and the American guards became more frequent and, surprisingly, less strained. The initial hostility and suspicion began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious curiosity. The guards, many of whom were young men themselves, began to see the prisoners not as enemy combatants, but as fellow human beings caught in the throes of a brutal war. They observed their resilience, their camaraderie, and their quiet dignity, and their preconceived notions began to crumble. Similarly, the German women began to see the American guards as individuals, rather than as representatives of a faceless enemy. They noticed their kindness, their patience, and their genuine efforts to treat them with respect. Small acts of compassion, a shared joke, or a helping hand, chipped away at the wall of animosity that had separated them. One particular guard, a young Texan named Billy, became known for his gentle demeanor and his willingness to help the women with their chores. He often brought them small gifts, such as wildflowers he had picked from the fields surrounding the camp, a gesture that was met with both gratitude and disbelief. These small acts of kindness challenged the prisoners' long-held beliefs about the enemy. They had been taught to hate and distrust Americans, to see them as materialistic and decadent. But the reality they encountered in the Texas POW camp was far different. The Americans they met were, for the most part, decent and compassionate people who were simply doing their duty. As the days turned into weeks, language lessons began. The American guards, with varying degrees of success, attempted to teach the women English, while some of the prisoners, in turn, offered lessons in German. These awkward but earnest attempts at communication served as a bridge between two cultures, fostering a sense of understanding and mutual respect. The seeds of empathy had been sown, and they were beginning to sprout in the most unlikely of places, a prisoner of war camp in the heart of Texas. What would bloom from this unlikely garden remained to be seen, but the potential for something beautiful, something truly human, was undeniably present. As the days turned into weeks within the confines of the Texas POW camp, a subtle shift began to occur within the hearts and minds of the female German soldiers. The initial shock of their capture, the harsh realities of the Eastern Front, and the bewildering kindness they encountered in Texas began to coalesce, forming a complex tapestry of conflicting emotions. They started to question the narrative they had been fed for so long. The unwavering belief in the Nazi regime, once a solid foundation upon which they had built their identities, began to show cracks. The propaganda that had fueled their fervor, the promises of a glorious future for the fatherland, now seemed hollow and distant, a stark contrast to the tangible reality of their imprisonment. Doubts crept in, whispering insidious questions about the true nature of the war and the motives of their leaders. These questions were fueled by the simple acts of kindness they witnessed daily, the genuine concern shown by some of the American guards, and the undeniable evidence of a world far removed from the one they had been taught to believe in. Guilt began to gnaw at their consciences. The realization that they had been complicit in a system of oppression and violence weighed heavily on their souls. They wrestled with the knowledge that their actions, however small, had contributed to the immense suffering caused by the war. Remorse washed over them as they contemplated the consequences of their choices and the impact on the lives of others. The arrival of letters from home further amplified their internal turmoil. These letters, often censored and delayed, painted a grim picture of a Germany ravaged by war, its cities in ruins, its people starving and desperate. The contrast between the propaganda they had consumed and the stark reality of their loved ones' suffering was jarring and deeply unsettling. As they shared these letters with one another, a sense of collective grief and disillusionment permeated their discussions. They spoke of the future, a future that seemed uncertain and fraught with challenges. What would become of them when the war was over? Would they be welcomed back to a country that was already struggling to survive? What role would they play in rebuilding a nation shattered by conflict? Differing opinions began to surface, reflecting the diverse experiences and perspectives of the women. Some clung to the hope that Germany could rise again, cleansed of its past sins. Others expressed deep skepticism, questioning whether true reconciliation was even possible. Some felt a sense of betrayal by the leaders who had led them astray. One of the women, a young woman named Elspeth, found herself particularly troubled by these questions. She had always been a fervent believer in the Nazi ideology, drawn to its promises of order and national pride. But now, faced with the reality of the war's devastation and the unexpected kindness of her captors, her faith was crumbling. Seeking solace and clarity, she began to keep a diary. Within its pages, she poured out her thoughts, her doubts, her fears, and her growing understanding of the world. This diary became her confidant, a safe space where she could grapple with her changing perspectives and begin to forge a new identity, one no longer defined by the propaganda of the past, but by the hope for a more peaceful and just future. Elspeth documented her experiences in great detail, carefully noting every interaction, every conversation, and every moment of introspection. This practice allowed her to make sense of the chaos around her. The diary became a powerful tool for self-discovery, helping her to unravel the layers of indoctrination that had shaped her worldview. Through her writing, she began to recognize the humanity in others, even in those she had been taught to hate. Elspeth's transformation was slow and gradual, marked by moments of doubt and uncertainty. But with each entry, she moved closer to a more nuanced and compassionate understanding of the world and her place within it. The days in the camp settled into a rhythm, a structured existence that was both monotonous and strangely comforting. However, the minds of the American guards were far from at ease. They were tasked with maintaining order, ensuring the safety of the prisoners, and upholding the principles of the Geneva Convention, a delicate balancing act in a world consumed by hatred and violence. Many of these guards were young men, barely out of their teens, drafted into service and thrust into this unusual role. They had left behind their families, their farms, and their dreams to fight a war they only vaguely understood. Now, they found themselves face to face with the enemy, not on a battlefield, but in a dusty Texas field, responsible for their well-being. For some, it was difficult to reconcile the image of the ruthless enemy they had been taught to hate with the reality of these young women, many of whom seemed just as lost and frightened as they were. They saw in their faces the same yearning for home, the same weariness of war. Other guards, hardened by their own experiences of loss and trauma, maintained a stricter, more detached demeanor. They viewed the prisoners with suspicion, constantly vigilant for any sign of defiance or rebellion. The internal conflict within the American ranks was palpable. There were those who advocated for strict discipline, believing it was the only way to maintain order and prevent any potential security breaches. They argued that the prisoners were still the enemy, regardless of their age or gender, and that any show of leniency would be a sign of weakness. Then there were those who believed in a more humane approach, who saw the prisoners not as hardened soldiers, but as victims of a brutal regime, deserving of compassion and understanding. They argued that kindness and respect were more effective tools than fear and intimidation. These divisions created tension within the guard ranks. Sergeant Miller, a veteran of the Pacific Theater, found himself caught in the middle, trying to navigate the conflicting ideologies and maintain unity among his men. He understood the need for discipline, but he also recognized the humanity of the prisoners. He had seen enough death and destruction to last a lifetime, and he was determined to treat these women with the dignity they deserved. He had lost his own brother in the war, a painful wound that fueled his commitment to ensuring that no one else suffered needlessly. He often found himself reflecting on the shared humanity that transcended national boundaries. He saw the same fear and longing in the eyes of the German prisoners that he had seen in the eyes of his own men, a stark reminder that war was a tragedy that affected everyone, regardless of which side they were on. As he looked across the barbed wire fence, he saw not the enemy, but fellow human beings, caught in the gears of a global conflict. The war had stolen their innocence, shattered their dreams, and left them stranded in a foreign land. It was his duty to treat them with respect, to provide them with comfort, and to offer them a glimmer of hope in a world shrouded in darkness. The days began to blur, one indistinguishable from the next. The women, stripped of their uniforms and their identities, found themselves slowly shedding the layers of propaganda that had once defined them. They began to talk, tentatively at first, then with increasing openness. Stories were shared, not of heroic victories or unwavering loyalty, but of fear, doubt, and a growing sense of disillusionment. They spoke of their families, their dreams, and the naive idealism that had led them to believe in a cause that now seemed utterly hollow. The shared experience of imprisonment, coupled with the unexpected kindness of their captors, created a bond that transcended their former allegiances. The American guards, in turn, began to see the women not as enemy soldiers, but as individuals, each with their own story, their own pain, and their own hopes for the future. The camp became a microcosm of the larger world, a place where prejudices were challenged and stereotypes were shattered. The women learned about American culture, its music, its movies, and its values. They discovered that the enemy was not the monstrous caricature they had been led to believe, but rather ordinary people, just like themselves, with their own fears and aspirations. The Americans, too, learned from the women, gaining a deeper understanding of the complexities of German society and the human cost of war. Language lessons became cultural exchanges, as the prisoners and the guards shared their customs, their traditions, and their perspectives on the world. The initial suspicion and animosity gradually gave way to a grudging respect, and in some cases, even friendship. There were moments of joy amidst the hardship. The women celebrated birthdays, sang songs, and played games. They organized small theatrical productions and talent shows, showcasing their skills and their creativity. These moments of levity provided a much-needed escape from the grim reality of their situation and helped to foster a sense of community and camaraderie. The American Guards often joined in the celebrations, sharing their own stories and their own talents. These shared experiences helped to bridge the cultural divide and to remind everyone of their common humanity. One evening, the camp organized a shared meal. The American Guards and the German prisoners sat together at long tables, sharing food and conversation. The atmosphere was relaxed and convivial, a far cry from the tense and guarded interactions of the early days. There was laughter, storytelling, and a sense of genuine connection. It was a symbolic moment, a testament to the power of human connection to overcome even the deepest divisions. As the sun set over the Texas landscape, casting a warm golden glow over the camp, it felt as though a small miracle had occurred. In the midst of war and hatred, a group of people from opposing sides had found common ground, a shared understanding of their humanity. The hope for reconciliation and a more peaceful future seemed, for a moment, within reach. Life within the confines of the Texas POW camp began to reveal itself in a series of small, yet significant, acts of kindness and forgiveness. These weren't grand gestures, but rather the quiet moments that spoke volumes about the human capacity for empathy, even amidst the lingering shadows of war. It began with prisoners helping each other navigate the challenges of camp life, offering a comforting word, sharing a meager ration, or simply lending a shoulder to cry on. The women, once divided by fear and suspicion, started to forge bonds of solidarity, finding solace in their shared experiences and the hope for a brighter future. The American Guards, too, played their part in this quiet transformation. They were not the enemy the women had been led to expect. Many displayed a remarkable degree of compassion and understanding, going beyond the call of duty to make the prisoners' lives a little easier. The medical personnel, in particular, were a constant source of comfort and care, tending to both physical and emotional wounds with equal diligence. They treated the German women not as enemy combatants, but as fellow human beings in need of healing. Stories of forgiveness began to emerge, tentative at first, then growing in strength and conviction. Some of the women, haunted by their past actions or beliefs, sought absolution from their fellow prisoners. Others found it within themselves to forgive those who had wronged them, recognizing that everyone had been caught in the grip of a terrible conflict. One particularly moving incident involved a young German woman who had lost her brother on the Eastern Front. She confided in an American guard, a man who had also lost a sibling in the war. They shared their grief, finding solace in their common loss and realizing that the pain of war transcended national boundaries. Another instance involved a prisoner who possessed some medical knowledge assisting an American guard whose child had fallen ill. With her limited supplies and skills, she was able to offer comfort and advice. This small act built unexpected trust, highlighting the shared values of care. The healing power of these human connections was undeniable. Bitterness and resentment began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of understanding and a belief in the possibility of redemption. The walls of prejudice and hatred, built up over years of propaganda and conflict, slowly began to crumble, revealing the shared humanity beneath. In these moments they learned that hatred and division were choices, not destinies, and that kindness and compassion were the keys to unlocking a more peaceful future. As the war neared its inevitable conclusion, a palpable tension gripped the Texas POW camp. The air, usually thick with the lazy drone of cicadas and the scent of sun-baked earth, now vibrated with a nervous energy. The women, once hardened by the Eastern Front and their unwavering belief in the Reich, found themselves adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The relentless propaganda that had fueled their fervor had long since dissipated, replaced by the stark reality of defeat and the daunting prospect of rebuilding their shattered lives. Rumors swirled like dust devils across the camp, each one more outlandish than the last. Some whispered of immediate repatriation, of being whisked back to Germany to reunite with their families. Others spoke of prolonged detention, of being held indefinitely as prisoners of a war that was no more. The uncertainty was a constant torment, gnawing at their resolve and fueling their anxieties. They tried to glean information from the American Guards, but their inquiries were met with polite but evasive answers. The Guards, too, were caught in the maelstrom of transition, unsure of what the future held. The news of Germany's surrender landed like a thunderclap. A collective gasp rippled through the camp as the announcement blared over the loudspeaker. Some wept openly, overcome by a mixture of relief and despair. For others, the news was met with a stunned silence, a profound sense of disbelief. Their world, the world they had known and fought for, had crumbled. The ideology they had embraced, the promises they had believed, had all been revealed as hollow lies. The women gathered in small groups, their faces etched with a mixture of emotions. There was relief, certainly, that the fighting was over, that the senseless slaughter had finally ceased. But there was also apprehension, a deep-seated fear of the unknown. What awaited them back in Germany? Would their families still be alive? Would their homes still be standing? Would they be welcomed back as heroes or ostracized as failures? Discussions about the future consumed their days and nights. They spoke of reconstruction, of rebuilding their shattered cities and economies. They spoke of forgiveness, of healing the wounds of war and forging a new path forward. They spoke of hope, of creating a world where such atrocities would never again be allowed to happen. Yet, beneath the surface of these hopeful pronouncements lay a deep-seated unease. The war had irrevocably changed them, leaving scars that would never fully heal. Preparations for their return to Europe began in earnest. The American authorities worked tirelessly to organize the logistics of repatriation, arranging transportation and ensuring the safety of the prisoners. The women were issued new clothes and supplies, a stark contrast to the threadbare uniforms they had worn for so long. As the day of their departure drew near, a sense of both relief and trepidation filled the air. They were going home, but they were no longer the same women who had left. The war had stripped them of their innocence, leaving them with a profound understanding of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the human spirit. The journey back would be more than just a physical relocation. It would be a journey of self-discovery, a reckoning with the past, and a tentative step towards an uncertain future. They were ready, or at least they hoped they were, to face whatever lay ahead. As the day for departure approached, a heavy silence settled over the camp, thicker than the Texas humidity. It wasn't a silence of fear, but one of contemplation, laced with the bittersweet knowledge that a chapter was closing. The women moved about their duties with a quiet purpose, each interaction carrying a weight of unspoken emotion. Years of war, imprisonment, and unexpected kindness had forged bonds that transcended nationality and ideology. Now, those bonds were about to be tested by distance and the uncertainties of a new world. The American Guards, too, seemed subdued, their usual banner replaced by a thoughtful reserve. They had witnessed firsthand the transformation of these women, from hardened soldiers to individuals grappling with their past and dreaming of a future. Many had come to see them not as the enemy, but as fellow human beings caught in the gears of a devastating conflict. There was a shared understanding that the farewells would be difficult, a recognition that these unlikely friendships had left an indelible mark on both sides. The final evening was marked by small acts of generosity and remembrance. A group of prisoners presented Sergeant Miller with a hand-knitted scarf, a gesture of gratitude for his fair treatment and quiet compassion. Another group sang a German folk song for the assembled guards, their voices filled with a haunting beauty that transcended language. There were tears, of course, but also laughter, as they reminisced about shared experiences, the awkward language lessons, the spirited volleyball games, the simple joys found in a life defined by confinement. Early the next morning, the women gathered in the camp courtyard, their meager belongings packed and ready. The air was thick with emotion, a palpable mixture of anticipation and regret. As they lined up to board the waiting trucks, the American Guard stood at attention, a silent salute to the women they had come to know. Handshakes were exchanged, promises were made to write, and tears flowed freely. One particular farewell stood out. Ingrid, the young woman who had initially struggled the most to accept the kindness of her captors, embraced Private Johnson, the young guard who had patiently taught her English. They had formed an unlikely friendship, finding solace in their shared love of literature, and their mutual longing for peace. As they embraced, Ingrid whispered, "Thank you for showing me that not all enemies are monsters." Johnson, his voice choked with emotion, replied, "And thank you for showing me that even in war, humanity can still prevail." As the trucks pulled away, the women waved goodbye, their faces etched with a mixture of sadness and hope. The Texas camp, once a symbol of their captivity, now represented a place of unexpected kindness and transformation. They were leaving behind a part of themselves, but they were also carrying with them a newfound belief in the power of human connection and the possibility of a better future. The journey back to Germany would be long and arduous, but they were no longer the same women who had arrived in Texas. They had been touched by grace, and they were determined to carry that grace with them into the world. The ship sliced through the waves, a metal leviathan carrying its cargo of war-weary women back towards a land ravaged by conflict. Germany awaited them, not as the proud nation they had left behind, but as a shadow of its former self, scarred and broken. As the shores of their homeland came into view, a wave of mixed emotions washed over them. Relief at finally returning home warred with the fear of what awaited them. The disembarkation was a somber affair. The once uniformed ranks were now a motley collection of individuals, their faces etched with the marks of hardship and uncertainty. The land they stepped onto was not the triumphant fatherland of their dreams, but a landscape of rubble and despair. The familiar streets were now unfamiliar, the buildings mere skeletons against the sky. Reintegrating into society proved to be an immense challenge. They were returning to a country grappling with its own demons, a nation struggling to come to terms with its defeat and the horrors it had unleashed upon the world. Many were met with suspicion and hostility, branded as collaborators or, at best, as naive followers of a discredited regime. The physical and emotional scars of the war were a constant reminder of their past, a past that many wanted to forget. Finding employment was difficult, resources were scarce, and the task of rebuilding their lives felt insurmountable. The skills they had acquired in the military were of little use in a society desperately trying to heal and rebuild. Housing was scarce, and many were forced to live in overcrowded conditions, sharing meager rations with their families. Yet, amidst the ruins, stories of resilience began to emerge. The women who had once donned uniforms and embraced a misguided ideology now turned their energies towards rebuilding their communities and creating a better future for their children. They worked tirelessly in factories, farms, and schools, contributing to the slow but steady recovery of their nation. Their experiences in the Texas POW camp had left an indelible mark on them. They had witnessed humanity in the face of adversity, and they had learned the importance of empathy, compassion, and forgiveness. These lessons guided them as they navigated the challenges of post-war Germany. They understood that true strength lay not in military might or ideological fervor, but in the ability to connect with others, to heal wounds, and to build a more just and peaceful world. One of the women, once a fervent believer in the Nazi cause, found solace in education. She became a teacher, dedicating her life to shaping the minds of young Germans, instilling in them the values of tolerance, understanding, and critical thinking. She wanted to ensure that future generations would never repeat the mistakes of the past. She carried the memory of the warm blankets and hot chocolate, a small act of kindness that had sparked a profound transformation within her, showing her the possibility of hope in the darkest of times. The years passed, each one leaving its mark on the landscape of Europe and on the hearts of those who had lived through the war. We look back, now, at the women who once wore the uniforms of a defeated nation, women who found themselves behind barbed wire in a place they never imagined. They had returned to a Germany fractured, both physically and spiritually, a nation grappling with the immense weight of its past. The transition was far from easy. Many faced suspicion and resentment, branded by their association with a regime that had brought so much suffering to the world. Yet, within their shared experience of imprisonment, they found a common ground, a silent understanding of the disillusionment and the slow, painful process of rebuilding faith in humanity. Some sought solace in rebuilding their families, mending broken relationships, and nurturing new generations with a profound understanding of the cost of conflict. Others dedicated themselves to community service, working tirelessly to heal the wounds of war and advocate for peace and reconciliation. A few even became involved in politics, determined to ensure that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. Each woman carried with her the lessons learned in that unlikely sanctuary in Texas, the unexpected kindness that had pierced through the layers of hatred and mistrust. They understood the importance of empathy, the transformative power of forgiveness, and the enduring strength of human connection. The Texas camp, once a symbol of their captivity, became a reminder of the shared humanity that transcended national borders and ideological divides. It was a testament to the capacity for compassion, even in the face of profound animosity. The memory of warm blankets and hot chocolate, simple acts of kindness in a time of great hardship, served as a beacon of hope, illuminating the path towards a more peaceful and just world. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could endure, and that even the most entrenched prejudices could be overcome. The story of the female German POWs in the Texas camp is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. It is a reminder that even in the midst of war and hatred, compassion and understanding can prevail. It is a story of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of human connection. It is a story that should be remembered, not just as a historical footnote, but as a timeless lesson in humanity. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel for more untold historical narratives. And be sure to click on the suggested video to continue exploring fascinating historical events.